Hey everyone, welcome back to another Explainer. We are diving straight into the absolute chaos that just unfolded in the Middle East. We're talking about a wild 24-hour pendulum swing of international military escalation. If you follow this stuff, you know the region is always a tangled web, right? But the sheer speed at which things just escalated in the Strait of Hormuz, it's honestly unprecedented. What literally started as a peaceful escort plan instantly mutated into a massive, multi-nation military standoff. So, to make sense of all these rapid-fire shifts, here's our roadmap for today. We'll cover Project Freedom in the Strait, the rapid escalation and naval clashes, the retaliation against UAE oil routes, how Israel stepped in to defend the UAE, new calls for a global coalition, and finally, what this all means for the bottom line, your oil and gas prices. All right, Section 1, Project Freedom in the Strait, the initial plan. Let's start right at the epicenter, where a proposed humanitarian gesture just completely unraveled. To really get what's happening, you have to picture the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is this incredibly narrow choke point, perfectly wedged between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. And right now, it is a giant parking lot. There's a massive backlog of commercial ships stuck in the Persian Gulf, and they literally can't move. Because the threat of drones, sea mines, and small arms fire from Iranian forces is so severe, these commercial vessels have entirely lost their insurance coverage for the specific corridor. So they are just stranded out there in the water, completely paralyzed by the geopolitics. So the initial fix was this thing called Project Freedom. Announced by President Trump, the initiative was actually framed as a humanitarian gesture. The concept was pretty straightforward, even if it was a bit of a paradox. The United States Navy would step in and act as a heavily armed defensive shield to peacefully escort these vulnerable commercial ships right out of the hazard zone. The whole goal was simply to restore freedom of movement, a peaceful de-escalation tactic to get global trade flowing again. Moving on to Section 2. Rapid escalation and naval clashes, the pendulum swings. Let's look at how this peaceful plan instantly spiraled into a kinetic firefight. The timeline here is just staggering. In a mere 8 hours, we went from announcing a peaceful escort mission to U.S. forces actively sinking 6 small Iranian vessels. Literally, at hour 0, the U.S. proposes Project Freedom. Iran almost immediately rejects the presence of U.S. ships. And by hour 8, the talking stopped. U.S. forces engaged and actually sank 6 Iranian boats that were out there harassing the exact same commercial ships the U.S. was trying to protect. And the rhetoric matched the action instantly. President Trump issued a very stark ultimatum to the Iranian regime, warning them that any forces targeting U.S. ships would be, quote, blown off the face of the earth. After consulting with military leadership, the message was made abundantly clear. Keep targeting American vessels, and you will be met with overwhelming destructive force. So, yeah, the whole peaceful navigation concept vanished pretty much overnight, replaced by an explicit threat of total decimation. Now, to really grasp the scale of this clash, you need a little historical context. Normally, Iran's go-to strategy involves swarm tactics. They'll send out anywhere from 20 to 40 of these highly maneuverable fast attack boats to intimidate commercial tankers. But this time, they only sent 6. And U.S. forces, who have total operational control over the air and sea right now, eliminated them without a second thought. It's a massive degradation of Iran's typical maritime playbook. To back up those heavy warnings, the U.S. has flooded the zone with a staggering amount of firepower. We're talking 15,000 service members, over 100 land and sea-based aircraft, guided missile destroyers, plus Apache and Seahawk helicopters. This is no standard patrol, guys. This is a massive, overwhelming fortress securing the skies and the waters to maintain absolute dominance over these vital corridors. Which brings us to Section 3, retaliation against UAE oil routes. The conflict spreads. With the strait completely locked down, the tension couldn't be contained and quickly spilled over the borders. Blocked from their usual tactics in the strait, Iran lashed out, setting off a chain reaction that directly hit civilian life in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. Since the U.S. blockade essentially stopped Iran from controlling the waters or shipping their own oil, they pivoted. They launched drone strikes straight at the UAE's oil industry. And this wasn't just military posturing. It caused massive civilian disruption. The threat of incoming missiles was so severe that schools across the UAE actually had to shut down completely and switch to distance learning for the rest of the week. Iran's targeting here was incredibly strategic. They deliberately struck the Fujairah port. Why? Because this specific terminal sits on the Gulf of Oman, making it the only major UAE port that completely bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. By sparking a major fire in this exact oil industry zone, Iran was actively trying to choke off the region's main alternative export route, aiming to inflict maximum economic pain since the main waterway was completely locked down. On to Section 4. Israel defends the UAE. Regional alliances activate. This direct attack immediately pulled a major regional power into the fray. In what is honestly a fascinating geopolitical shift, Israel stepped right in to defend the UAE. Just think about the historical weight of this for a second. You have Iran attacking an Arab nation and the state of Israel actively intervening to provide air defense. They activated their highly advanced Iron Dome missile defense system to intercept Iranian projectiles mid-air, protecting UAE infrastructure from taking further hits. And Israeli leadership didn't mince words. They framed this not as a one-off skirmish, but as a broader, coordinated assault against U.S. and Israeli allies across the entire Middle East. Naftali Bennett made it crystal clear, stating, "Today we are united against the Islamic regime. This is a declaration of renewal of Iran's war against allies." It really reinforced this unified regional front stepping up to say they will not be intimidated by Iranian aggression. Section 5 calls for a global coalition, expanding the mission. As the actual theater of conflict grew, so did the guest list of involved nations. This is no longer just a localized issue. It is actively globalizing. Once Iran started taking shots at unrelated nations trying to navigate these waters, specifically an incident where a South Korean cargo ship was fired upon, the U.S. shifted gears to expand the coalition. President Trump immediately called on South Korea to bring their forces into Project Freedom. Suddenly, we're looking at a full-blown international military coalition. And to manage this rapidly growing operation, an emergency press conference was scheduled with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Keane. Finally, Section 6, the bottom line, oil prices. What is the domestic impact here, and why does a shootout thousands of miles away actually matter to you? Well, here is the immediate domestic reality. Right before this insane 24-hour escalation, global oil prices were actually collapsing. But the second this conflict kicked off, they skyrocketed. The entire global economy relies on the oil flowing through the Strait of Hormuz and bypass ports like Fujairah. We were enjoying a welcome dip in prices, but the minute missiles went up and ships went down, the global markets completely panicked. The geopolitical risk premium was instantly slapped back onto the price of a barrel, sending costs soaring straight back up. At the end of the day, it hits your wallet. Getting back to the roughly $2 a gallon gas prices we saw at the beginning of the year requires a fast end to this conflict. When international shipping lanes turn into literal war zones, the cost to transport energy spikes, and guess who pays for that? You do, right at the pump. If we want to stabilize domestic affordability for things like groceries and gas, stabilizing this region is absolutely crucial. You just can't have low domestic inflation while major international trade arteries are literally on fire. Which leaves us pondering a pretty huge, fragile link between foreign military standoffs and our everyday cost of living. As we watch fleets deploy and missiles intercept over the Gulf, the real battle isn't just about who controls a narrow strip of water. It's about the stability of the entire global economy. So how long can global trade routes withstand this explosive tension before it permanently shatters domestic grocery and gas affordability? Let that sink in. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep a close eye on those markets, and I'll catch you next time.